This is 757 Saturday Sports Talk with Matt Hatfield and Coach Ed Young on ESPN Radio 94.1.
Back here on this edition of 757 Saturday Sports Talk on ESPN Radio 94.1, brought to you by Larry King Law. Injured in an accident, you call 757 INJURED for Larry King. We're pleased to be joined at this time by a special guest. He writes for the Daily Progress up in Charlottesville and Seaville Varsity. You can follow him on Twitter at John N. Harvey III. That's John N. Harvey III. We say hello to John Harvey here on ESPN Radio 94.1. How's life been for you, John, up there where there's probably not been a whole lot of sports to cover at this point?
It's been definitely interesting. I mean, I've been in this business for over 20-some years, and this has definitely been the strangest, probably 8-month stretch for me. But I mean, we're making good with it this weekend. Had a chance to cover a couple games at the private school level for football, but other than that, it's just been basically covering the Virginia High School League and seeing and the private schools and trying to figure out what they're going to do, moving forward.
Yeah, I think I saw on Twitter come across my timeline last night. You were at the Woodbury Forest game, private school with was it Fork Union?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So that's what, maybe your fourth or fifth game tops that you've been to, whereas normally you'd probably have seen about 15, 20 games by now, right?
Pretty much. I mean, I think Fork Union had that was their sixth game, I believe, or fifth game, something like that. They had a 5 or 6 game schedule. They played at Fredericksburg, up in Fredericksburg against St. Michael's, the Archangel or something. They played them twice. They played North Cross and that sort of thing, but this was the first game for Woodbury Forest. So it was good to see them back out, on the field, and they look pretty sharp. But I think they're just all excited to just be out there playing again. So
sure. Well, I know you've been working the phones and the emails and all those things very hard since the early summer portion. You've been doing a lot of different stories on the VHSL and its return to play scenarios and how things are going with Dr. Hahn and his office and his staff. And I know, in fact, my colleague here, Coach Young, was on a rules, I believe it was a Zoom with Tom Dolan and people on there on Thursday. And I think you were also on the webinar on mitigation strategies. What did you take away from that specific session?
Well, obviously, Dr. Hahn said all along, that, normal doesn't exist with this pandemic. So obviously there are going to be some changes. Some folks aren't going to like the changes, but these are necessary things that are going to have to take place in order for them to have the possibility to have sports, this coming fall. And winter and, the rest of the sports. I know that a lot of the changes that they are the mitigation strategies that they are implementing are a little unique. With basketball, with the loss of the jump ball, I'm sure Coach Young has plenty of comments about that and that sort of thing. And with lacrosse, with them taking out the face-off for boys lacrosse, that's gained a lot of attention, and stuff like that. But it's just one of these things where people have to understand this is what's going to have to happen. Obviously it's not ideal, but in order for them to play, safety is the top priority, and we all want to be safe in the long run.
Hey, John, Ed Young here. Appreciate you all coming on today for this. You mentioned about that jump ball in basketball. I heard some of the special rules. I don't have a problem with the visitors getting the first possession. I wouldn't even mind if they made that a permanent rule. It wouldn't bother me in the least. Overtime, you flip a coin. I kind of laughed when I heard about, you flip a coin. But, it's 50-50. Either team gets a chance to play. And you're still playing 4 minutes, so you're not going to lose. It's not first score wins the game. If it was that, then we'd have an issue. So I really don't have any problem with those. It's been, they always try to get away from jump balls back in the day. And originally – they had a jump ball when the game was first invented only because both teams were home teams. So they just threw the ball up and said whoever gets it first. So I don't have any problem with that. I'm a little concerned as we heard the news that up in Northern Virginia, a couple of schools are not going to play. So it looks like they're the first ones to come out, actively say we are not going to play. I was telling Matt here, we talked earlier before coming on the air, as a high school coach, it scares me because it opens the door for those that are a little leery about playing to feel more comfortable to say, you know what, we're not going to play. Now, I preface my comments by saying I'm all for the safety of everybody because I'm in that. I'm part of that everybody. So I wouldn't have a problem if they say shut it down. But as a writer, and as you've been around all of this, what's your feeling about that in terms of, okay, here's the first ones to do it?
I mean, I think the kids and the coaches, if it was up to them, they want to play, they'd be out there right now playing. But at the same time, I'm concerned with just the events that I've gone to and seen the way the protocols have been followed. I mean, it's been all over the place. I know I went to the first football game that I went to up in Fredericksburg. They didn't require spectators to wear face masks or any face coverings and stuff like that. They just thought it was and none of the visiting players and stuff, they didn't have face masks on and that sort of thing. So, and it made me kind of pause. And then of course you go full circle. The game that I covered yesterday between Woodbury Forest and Fork Union, both of those are private schools, boarding schools, and they have very strict bubble-esque protocols in place. That, I mean, it took them almost a month to a month and a half to actually coordinate to be able to play that game because both schools had to sign off on the protocols. So, I mean, I think that I would love for them to be playing sports. I mean, I love high school sports. That's what I'm passionate about. But at the same time, I want everybody to be healthy and all too. So I wouldn't be surprised to see more schools shutting it down sooner rather than later. I think once these dominoes start falling, I mean, you could see more and more, and it could be a bad thing, and we could not have sports.
And John, the thing I look at when people ask me about it, it's harder, I think, under this situation for high school sports to play and you just said it, based on the protocol you have to follow. It's easier with the pros. They can do a bubble situation. They have more money. They have more people in place. Colleges kind of the same way. But when you go down to the high school level, to me, it's a major, major jump that I'm not so sure we're all able to do the protocol and the testing and all that. That's what I lean on in this.
Exactly. And I mean, the protocols can be different from, locality to locality. The protocols in, say, Suffolk may be different than the protocols, say, in Williamsburg, or the protocols in Williamsburg may be different than the protocols in Charlottesville and that sort of thing. And also, I mean, they're talking about the Virginia, it's a private school level too. They may not, play basketball until January. And another thing that really kind of piqued my interest was the fact that, okay, you're going to allow these kids to play, but for the most part these students aren't going to be in class actually in the building, so it's not safe for the kids to be in the building, but it's safe for them to play a sport. So that's another thing that people have to weigh in on.
We're talking with John Harvey, who's covering prep sports for the Daily Progress and Seaville Varsity. Follow them on Twitter at Seaville Varsity and Daily Progress up there in Charlottesville. It's ESPN Radio 94.1 here on 757 Saturday Sports Talk. And John, that kind of led me to my next thing I wanted to get to you with is that was pretty much why Arlington yesterday, the three high schools up there, with Wakefield, Washington, Liberty, and Yorktown. Actually, it was Thursday night, technically, with their meeting that they decided not to have winter sports. I guess then it's really going to get tricky here, and I'm going to throw it your way. You may or may not know this, if the VHSL is leaving this up to the individual school districts to decide. If there is let's say a district that has a district schedule, and there's a specific city that says we're not playing, but they play in a district where another city's playing, what does that do to those other schools in that district? Is it kind of hijack their schedule in a sense? Because we know some are saying you can play only district schedule, you can play out of district. Have you gotten any feedback from the VHSL if they will step in, or are they just leaving it completely up to the individual school districts and divisions to make those calls?
My understanding from all that I've heard is that the Virginia High School League is leaving it up to the school districts and the localities and that sort of thing. I mean, scheduling is going to be an issue. Especially with the officials. I mean, another thing is the officials. Okay, say you have an officiating group that officiates mostly in a certain region. But once we get to the state level, are those officials going to feel safe going from, say, Charlottesville to, say, Northern Virginia to officiate a game where you're doing mixed crews, where a lot of those times that you don't know who those folks are, and you're meeting them for the first time, or for the first time in a long time, and just the safety of that. So it's going to be very, very tough. I mean, I know I was doing some research in history, the history of this. This is the first time, I believe, since the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic that state playoff games haven't been played in public schools other than wartime. So, I mean, that's a long time. So, I mean, it's going to be definitely interesting, and folks are going to have to take this seriously and not just say, oh, it's just some passing disease. I mean, people have lost their lives to this, and they obviously want to make this as safe as possible.
And also, John, when you look at this, the idea of fans, as we saw with the pro sports, some of them no fans. Okay, now what do we do with the high school? Now here's where the almighty dollar comes into play too, at all levels. That we're going to let some fans in, no fans in. Who's going to dictate who comes in? Who's going to police it? Which is another major headache to worry about because of the governor's stand about so many. So now we have the fan issue as one, and then number two, a lot of people brought up the idea of streaming games. All right, and I think you've done some looking into those situations. Your take on those?
Sir. Well, it's one of these things where, a lot of these school districts and programs depend on certain sports to help pay for the entire sports program. Like a good high school football program can fund pretty much an entire, sports program at a high school for other sports that may not draw as much. So, and I mean, so it's going to be an economic issue, but at the same time, the Virginia High School League has stood fast, and they're limited to the 250 rule, and that's including participants, and that's including personnel that have to be there in terms of game officials, administrators, and that sort of thing. So it's going to be very interesting. I think the streaming opportunity is a good thing, but in terms of how they're going to decide who gets in and who doesn't get in, that's going to be a nightmare for the athletic directors and the administrators. But that's going to be something that, again, everybody's going to have to be on the same page and be understanding. And sometimes we know that parents and folks, think with their heart and not their head sometimes.
Couple more minutes here with John Harvey from the Daily Progress and Seville Varsity here on 757 Saturday Sports Talk on ESPN Radio 94.1. Give him a follow on Twitter at John N. Harvey III here as we talk about the challenges here with prep sports as their return to play scenario is in place here for December for many of the Virginia High School League teams and athletes and coaches here. And you did that story back in late October about the streaming situation there with the NFHS network and the Pixelot cameras. The thing that came to my mind, though, is, John, and this might be one you aren't able to answer, but do you think there will be some schools? I mean, many are going to cite for health and safety reasons, which we have no issue with, and that's got to be paramount and first and priority here. But do you think some schools will make a decision based on not that, but due to the economic financial ramifications because of things, unable to generate what it would cost to keep their athletic programs afloat? Have you gotten any insight from some of the ADs you've talked to about that?
I haven't really heard about that, but I mean, that's obviously a good and great question. I mean, especially at some of the smaller schools where, it could be tough. I mean, and they may just have to, call things off. And another thing is you have to worry about Title IX with this too. I don't know how big an issue Title IX is in terms of canceling seasons and that sort of thing, but it is it's something that I'm sure every athletic director and administrator is thinking about. There's no doubt about that.
Well, John, when you look at the situation with the COVID and the protocols, we have everybody doing that. One of the other things that we've noticed too is, and people bring this up, well, how come the kids are allowed to play recreational sports, AAU basketball as one, 7-on-7 football, baseball? I've seen the little guys out there playing some baseball. But yet we can't have the schools governed playing. I keep telling everybody it's two different things. You can't say, well, the schools are hurting the kids because everybody else is letting them play. It's really two different things. Any take on that situation?
I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, basically, this is you're talking about a school issue, there's an education issue. Every school in the state, in order to come back, in their return policy, they had to come up with a policy, and they had to follow that to a T. And then that policy had to be approved by, the governor's office, the officials, and that sort of thing. And for them to sign off, for them to even be able to come back, get the kids back into the schools. So that is why this is a totally different thing from an AAU basketball and that sort of thing. I mean, I've been to a couple AAU basketball games during this, and while it was very well run, they made safety was paramount and that sort of thing. It was very odd. It's just going to games and during a pandemic has been very, very odd, and I'm not quite sure how I feel about it, but I mean, I like seeing them out there playing, and then it's going to be that way once the kids finally get out there. But I think once they return to play and hopefully, get a season in, everybody's going to forget about, the protocols and maybe, what they're facing in terms or what they don't like about it. Just seeing that the kids have an opportunity to play.
Last one for me, gentlemen. I appreciate you coming on the show. I'm sure we'll get you back on here again. When you look at this Championships Plus One condensed interscholastic plan, we know that the fall sports, which include not only football, but other sports such as field hockey, cross country, golf, volleyball, is scheduled to get underway February the 4th. With its games there and go through, I believe it's going to be the first contest date technically is March the 1st, but they can practice then and all that. But with the winter sports coming up here, and basketball certainly is front and center, but you also have gymnastics, indoor track, swim and dive, wrestling. And wrestling is a pretty high contact sport. If the VHSL was to reverse course here in the next month with feedback from the CDC, the governor's office, that, we're having an increase in cases here and it may not be wise and say for a specific sport, in your opinion, do you think they would march on with other sports, or if one of the sports in the winter grouping can't go, they all can't go? What's your feeling on that?
That is another great question. I mean, I know listening to the webinar the other day, Coach Dolan, I call him Coach Dolan because he was the athletic director at Jamestown when I was working in Williamsburg for many, many years. So he's always going to be Coach Dolan to me. But, he was he ironed out that wrestling was one of those hot button sports that the Department of Health and had a real, they were real hesitant about them, but they liked the plan that they had in place to help mitigate things. And I just don't know. I think if they do shut the door on one sport, it could leave the door open to shut them all down. I don't know what is actually going to become of that. I hope that doesn't happen. I hope everybody gets a chance to participate and play and win championships and compete and stuff like that. But I mean, we're all at the mercy of this COVID-19 right now.
Absolutely.
And John, on that, you're right. I kind of feel if you tell one group of athletes, coaches, you can't play your sport because you're more dangerous, you really got to say, to be honest, everybody has to be under that boat. Again, high school is so different than college and pro. Colleges are going to allow athletes to have an extra year. Mm-hmm. Right? Pros sign contracts. If you miss a year, your contract is still good. High school, you have 4 years. That's it. You miss a year of sports, you don't get to come back as a 19, 20-year-old high school athlete and get another year in or repeat your freshman year. It doesn't happen. And the other thing is, the underlying factor, too, is nobody wants to be in charge when an outbreak hits your school. That's what I think is most fearful for everybody, because you don't know what's going to happen at that point. And I think that's the underlying thing that makes people most worried.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Coach. I mean, it's tough. I mean, my sister is a middle school teacher here, and I see the struggles that she deals with in terms of, getting, this, teaching at a virtual setting and also possibly in a setting where they're in Class 2. And, I can only imagine what the scenarios are facing with the administrations and the higher-ups that are trying to make these calls and make things safe for everybody.
Well, he is John Harvey with the Charlottesville Daily Progress newspaper, also Seaville Varsity. Follow Daily Progress, Seaville Varsity, and John N. Harvey, III, on Twitter. Believe me when I say this, he's as plugged in as anybody when it comes to all the news coming out of the VHSL office. So anything that comes out in the next month or so, you'll want to be making sure that you keep up to date with what he reports. Thank you so much. Enjoy your weekend. We hope to see you somewhere safely on a basketball court or a football field in the near future.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate the time.
You got it.
Thanks, John.
That is John Harvey with us here on 757 Saturday Sports Talk, and we will take a timeout. We've still got some buy or sell to come your way. We've got David Glenn of the ACC Sports Journal, ACCSports.com, and The Athletic to break down Notre Dame versus Clemson, as well as Virginia Tech Liberty. Maybe sprinkle in some basketball, too. And, of course, the Pick 3 selections to see if I will increase my 82% of 18-4-2 as I continue to gloat and break my arm, pat myself on the back, or if I finally have a losing week. Dino has a dog. Ed has his picks. Good or bad, we know what they will be. Coming your way, too.
Hey, speaking of dogs, I have a dog, Black Lab. I should let him do the picks.
Yeah, go ahead. Call
Could
him
be
up.
worse than me.
If he barks, that means you take the road team. If he doesn't bark, you take the home team.
I'm going to do that.
Good strategy.
I'm going to give him a call.
It's all coming your way on ESPN Radio 94.1.